Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to wait just a minute or two before we get started. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Get the task force. I got to go back. No. All right. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining our task force, our Tuesdays at 3 o'clock. We do every week. And the borough president is running late. She's here, but she is finishing up an interview, so she will join us shortly. But thank you for joining us. You know, the big news, I mean, I guess there's always a lot of news and a lot of debate and a lot of things happening. This task force has, you know, focuses sometimes on COVID and on the vaccine and the rollout. And then also on issues related to sort of reopening and getting New York back to a good place. You know, this week, you know, a lot of what was in the news had to do with a school in East Harlem, PS 79, which unfortunately had to close because of a high number of COVID cases. It was, I think, only just among staff, but it was a high enough number that the Department of Ed closed the school, and it will reopen on the 28th. So, you know, we were sorry to hear that. The borough president has continued to call for a remote learning option, so that when schools do have to close, there is a way to continue to teach and not just give out worksheets, and also an option for parents who choose it. But that's not what we have right now. So we're sort of case by case basis, and we're waiting to see what happens at PS 79. Hopefully it will, you know, reopen next week, and people will be healthy. And we are continuing also to try to figure out more testing, because that seems like, while there is a testing infrastructure, it seems like there is a need for more testing among school communities. Although the mayor said now testing is once a week as opposed to every 2 weeks, it still is only for 10% of the school community. So we want to see if we can help work on that. So that's sort of the news around where we are with COVID this week. But on another note, it is Climate Week. So we are very happy to have some terrific speakers here to talk about climate change, its impact in New York City. There are various mayoral agencies that focus on this. They couldn't all be here today. We're very delighted that DEP is here today. But you know, we did want to focus on this topic, particularly in light of the storm a few weeks ago, where, you know, there was incredible destruction. Obviously, the tragic deaths of folks who are in illegal basement apartments. You know, the waterfalls cascading in the subway, the roads turning to rivers. I mean, the police department report was that they towed 1,400 cars that had been abandoned just in the short few hours of the storm. I mean, that's a lot of cars. So, you know, we clearly need to do a lot of work here in New York City to get ready for these for this inevitable climate disasters. So we are very happy to be focused on that this week primarily. So our first speaker, she has to leave a little bit early, so I'd like to maybe ask Claire Newman to speak first. Claire is the president and CEO of the Trust for Governor's Island. And one of the amazing features of Governor's Island is they have a climate center. So I was wondering if, so Claire, if you can sort of jump in and tell us about the Climate Center and some of the work it's doing and how it can address some of these climate issues, that'd be terrific. So take it away, Claire. There.
Sorry, I had a hard time getting to my mute button. Thank you so much for the intro, and thank you for accommodating. I'm sorry, I have a long-standing doctor's appointment. Probably too much information for everybody, but there it is. Anyway, thanks for this opportunity. We're really thrilled to be updating the group on where we are with the Center for Climate Solutions. By way of background, as mentioned, I'm the president of the Trust for Governors Island. Hopefully everyone on this call has been out to the island, but if you haven't, please come and I will give you a tour. It will be fun. We're 172-acre, very special public space in the heart of New York Harbor. It's just a few minutes from Lower Manhattan and Brooklyn by ferry. We manage the whole entire island, save 22 acres. That is a designated national monument and operated by the NPS at the federal level. And what's so special about the island is it is this sort of extraordinary mix of different urban and really ecological contexts. We have 1.3 million square feet of historic buildings on the North Island that are primed for adaptive reuse. We have a fantastic 43-acre park on the southern part of the island and open space all over, in addition to opportunities for new construction here in these fenced-off areas on either side of the island. I grew up in New York City and I had never heard of, let alone been to Governor's Island before maybe 15 years or so ago. And that's because the island historically was originally used by the Lenape as a hunting and fishing camp, but then was closed to the public for close to 200 years, operated as an Army base and then a Coast Guard base. And it's only recently been sort of re-stitched into the fabric of New York City. Our mission is really we were created in 2010 with the specific mission of taking great care of this fantastic asset and making sure that it is a great resource for New Yorkers from across the 5 boroughs. And that's how we think about what we do on the island day in, day out, whether it's how we mow the lawns or how we do public programming. In the 10 years since the island came back into local control, it really has made extraordinary progress thanks to leadership that came before me and many mayoral administrations as well. But over $400 million has been invested into the island, really going into the creation of this fabulous park, but also in bringing infrastructure to the island to support adaptive reuse and new construction. We have educational and cultural partnerships with fantastic groups from across the city. And now we start to get into the climate conversation because we're home to organizations like the Harbor School, which is a public high school with CTE focused education with careers only related to stuff you can do on the water, marine biology, maritime technology, and really preparing a next generation of New York City students for careers in the space of climate and the environment. In addition to many others, a composting organization, Earth Matter, an urban farm, Grow NYC, Climate Museum, the list goes on and on and on. And we have become a real public destination, growing from 8,000 visitors the first year we reopened to the public to nearly 1 million a year nowadays. So what we've spent a lot of time in the past couple of years thinking about is, with this fantastic momentum, how do we continue to build on that mission and to continue to deliver on this promise to be a great resource for New York City? And we have a strategy focused on 3 pillars. The first is continuing to expand on, care for, and make more accessible our public space and park. When you come to Governor's Island, you feel like you have escaped from the city and you're somewhere in New York that is totally different than anywhere else you've ever been. We have fantastic arts and cultural programming, and there's lots of opportunity to grow, in particular space for artist residencies and to grow public art programming here on the island. And then this newest strand is this idea of, on Governor's Island, creating a center for climate solutions, really taking advantage again of what's so unique about the island, and also this natural community of nonprofits and educational orgs that has chosen Governor's Island as the place they want to do their work. So what is it that we actually mean by that? In fall of this year, we announced in partnership with the mayor a vision to create a Center for Climate Solutions that is really a cross-sector hub where we can bring together educational institutions alongside small businesses and innovation, alongside advocacy and environmental justice work, all in one place that really can become a citywide and possibly even global focus point for the important work we need to do to make sure our city is much better prepared the next time we have a Hurricane Ida. Specifically, the three ways we think Governor's Island can contribute to this dialogue is a focus on climate adaptation and making sure that every neighborhood in the city across the 5 boroughs is much better prepared for these kinds of storm events, heat waves, and the things that we understand much more commonly associated with climate change, like rising sea levels, are prepared actually for that. Growing well-paying green jobs in New York, and being competitive with other cities as more and more businesses and workforce development is occurring in that space. And then the huge advantage of doing something like this in a place like Governor's Island is that we are a public space. And so everything that we do out here, we want to be an educational opportunity and an opportunity for engagement, and put front and center the work and make it understandable and communicable so that when folks are coming to Governor's Island for a gathering or just a day in the park, they're exposed to this work. This was based on, a bunch of research that we did over the past couple of years, as I mentioned, in partnership with other agencies in the city who are working on this. I know you mentioned, Jessica, DEP. We've also worked closely with Mayor's Office of Resilience and Mayor's Office of Climate Policy. But what we heard were a few key ways Governor's Island could be helpful in this fight. First, the field is becoming much more cross-disciplinary. And what you're seeing is a movement to put the natural sciences alongside issues like policy, communications, advocacy, so that we can see these issues actually get reflected back into our urban fabric. A need for a public showcase point. Let's demonstrate what the latest and greatest new approaches to architecture and design so that our buildings can become much more resilient. A place to gather and have a center of gravity. Again, this focus on making sure we have New Yorkers who are prepared to be in these jobs and good paying jobs, and to fill the desperate need to have folks trained in these spaces. And then, as I mentioned, if you think about climate as a field as a triangle with the sort of pure research on one point, mitigation, i.e. trying to just reduce our carbon footprint on another, and then adaptation as the third. Adaptation has been the least invested in, and that's something that we really need to change. And unfortunately, this past year has given us lots of examples of just how woefully underprepared we are. Our work is starting right now with a focus on attracting a research and educational partner to come to Governor's Island and build and program a facility dedicated to this work, specifically focused on adaptation, embedding issues of climate justice and environmental justice into everything they do, a focus on public health. Climate and public health intersect more and more. Again, we've seen that bear out during the pandemic, and we've seen it bear out in recent crises. And then that can be surrounded to make it cross-sector with dorm and faculty housing, space for small-scale convening, space for business operations, and then all within this footprint on Governor's Island of a living laboratory and cultural destination. We released a request for expressions of interest in late June of this year. Again, specifically focused on attracting that key first component, which is the academic partner. And the city has made available up to $150 million to support that work, with the idea being that this is going to be the first step in creating this broader climate center vision on Governor's Island. Responses are due in just a few weeks, October 13th. We've gotten great feedback so far, and so we're hopeful that we're going to get fantastic, ambitious responses in the door from universities and nonprofits, both across the city, but even potentially across the globe. In that RFEI, we've really focused on 3 key goals that we had developed coming out of this research, but also in partnership with our Community Advisory Council. The first is, as I started to allude to, how is this space going to contribute to the field? And a focus on meaningfully and equitably advancing climate-related fields and actionable solutions, again, with particular focus on key priority areas that I talked through. An impact on the island. I want to flag that what we've really tried to lead with in this RFEI is the critical importance of making whatever gets built out here as absolutely cutting edge with respect to sustainability and resiliency as possible. The island itself has to showcase how to do this new construction and adaptive reuse in a way that really helps us rethink what we mean by sustainable and resilient urban development. And then as well, opportunities for New Yorkers. At the end of the day, we need for this work to actually reflect directly back into New York City neighborhoods in terms of these goals around community resilience, in terms of high quality job creation, and the other things that are mentioned here. Jessica, I don't know how much time we have. I could go into detail about the different goals, but want to be respectful of your agenda.
Sure. Yeah, I think first of all, this is a terrific slide presentation. So I don't know if it's available to be circulated.
Yeah, certainly, 100%. Yeah,
I'd love to be able to do that. Does anyone have any immediate questions for Claire? Just based on sort of what you've already presented. I don't see hands right now. I guess one of my questions is I know you're at a very early stage and, the RFEI is not, the responses aren't even due yet, but will it be true that at a certain point, the Climate Center will have some sort of very specific recommendations for the city in terms of, dealing with flood water, will there be actual concrete things that people can say, okay, well, the city should be doing X, Y, Z that will come out of the Climate Center?
Yeah, and I think in particular, as I mentioned earlier, for mayoral entities like the Mayor's Office of Resilience and Climate Policy, the idea that there can be this almost research engine with whom the city obviously is going to be intrinsically partnered is critically important, both in terms of the ability to use the island as a place of study. Again, there is so much opportunity for the sort of raw science in the surrounding waterways and then in the landscape of the island. But then in particular, in terms of coming up with new solutions and recommendations. And one of the things we think is really compelling about doing something like this on Governor's Island is we don't have any residents. And so when we try new stuff and we experiment, it's not actually like on someone's home. We can see what works before rolling it out in much more vulnerable circumstances. So yes, that is a very key part of the project. And I think, honestly, in particular, I would say even a year ago, if people heard about climate change, you think about sea level rise, but we've seen now in this past year what else it means and what that means for our infrastructure, for the subways, for public housing, for public schools. These are areas that need a lot of focus for New York.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any other questions? Okay. I don't see any others. So we do want to thank you so much for taking the time. I know you were on a tight time frame today, so we really appreciate it, Claire. And we'd love to send around this presentation because I think most people don't actually know exactly what's going on Governor's Island. We kind of hear bits and pieces, but certainly, this very sort of intensive climate work you're doing, I think is really interesting. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll send you the slides so you can share it with the group.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time. So next, I am looking through, our next speaker, we are very delighted that Department of Environmental Protection agreed to join us today. I see a few names. I'm not sure if Deputy Commissioner Angela Licata is with us. Yes, great. They are, I'm sorry, Angela Licata is the Deputy Commissioner for Sustainability at the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. And, after the storm the other week, I called them up and said, I'm sure there's a lot of things that, you're in the process of already doing. I'm sure there's more you want to do. So, can you come talk to this group sort of about where you're at in terms of sustainability projects that are happening or that you're hoping will happen. So, Deputy Commissioner Licata, if you're on, love to hear from you.
Yes, hi everybody, good afternoon, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share this time with you today. The department has been looking and studying the climate issue since probably about the time frame of 2008. We did our first climate assessment report and we convened the academic community and actually initiated work with what is now called the New York City Panel on Climate Change. And they have been helping us with the projections and with really understanding what we might see unfold in the future. Only what happened next was that the future was upon us. So as we were studying this and learning more about what we might see, we started to experience more and more of these events. They're not as steady as we might see in the future, which might be faced with some of these daily types of flooding and sunny day flooding issues associated with the sea level rise. But we did expect and experience simultaneously the events that you saw just, over the last several months. And we have been looking at this from what the department does, which is to provide high quality potable drinking water to over 8 million New Yorkers and 1 million people within our watershed, where we obtain our water from the reservoir systems to the north. We've been looking at this issue with respect to drainage and the storm sewers and also our wastewater treatment responsibilities, because we want to ensure that our harbors stay cleaner than they've ever been in the past history of New York City once it was heavily developed over 100 years or so now. We're seeing finally the return of some of the species that were extirpated from the area, indicating the higher level of water quality. And we don't want any backsliding. So what we've been doing is we have been trying to adapt. We've been trying to become more resilient. And it takes a lot of strategy. It takes a lot of funding in order to be able to do this. So first and foremost, I'm going to just speak quickly about the water supply. What we've been doing there is we've been trying to build in more redundancy. Our water is fairly well protected. We don't really see the droughts like they do in the West, but every once in a while, we do see ourselves running into dry conditions. And we try to avoid needing to impose restrictions on residents by increasing our ability to pull water from various systems in the reservoir. So we actually have 3 different systems. We have the Delaware River system, we have the Catskill system, and we have the Croton system. So by developing interconnections, by increasing the amount of tunnels and distribution systems in New York, we can ensure against having those kind of drought-related restrictions. We also do a lot to curtail demand in the city. So we have a lot of conservation programs, and we've seen a tremendous drop in the demand for water. We're now pretty much holding steady below the usage in the 1960s, even though we've added over 1 million people to New York City. So then I will talk a little bit more about drainage. We've been building out the sewer system. We have been increasing the capacity of the sewer system by increasing our design criteria. And this is really important because we expect to see storms that are going to be larger and more intense, like we saw in Ida, where over 3 inches fell in an hour in Central Park. But we know that the drainage system alone will not be able to keep up with that intense level of precipitation. So what we try to do now is we try to supplement that system. We try to add on green infrastructure. We add on high-level storm sewers. We are adding on the rules and regulations for private property redevelopment, so that instead of sending as much flow to the sewers as the sewers can handle on, a regular or average conditions, we ask the property owners to manage the maximum that they can on site. And we're doing this through new rules and regs that we'll talk about in a moment. And then again, with the wastewater treatment systems, we try to protect those systems. They are biologically dependent systems. That's how New York City handles its wastewater treatment. And we want to make sure that during a storm event, those systems are not overwhelmed, causing a massive amount of untreated sewage to come into the remaining water bodies. And lastly, I'll just mention, we also have combined sewer overflows, because about 60% of our sewer network is a combined system. It takes the sanitary flow and it takes the storm flow in one pipe. And that's just how a lot of older cities were developed. When we build new sewers now, we build them separately. We build one for sanitary and one for storm, but this is a legacy issue that we are really grappling with to reduce the amount of combined sewer overflows that we have on any given day. So needing to just choose to focus on a few of these ideas, we chose this agenda for you today. We're going to look at some stormwater flooding maps that we've been putting together, some of the management strategies that we're pursuing, such as water reuse and the green infrastructure program, and what we're calling this new stormwater rule, and giving you some examples of some projects. So next slide, please. And these are the two conditions that we mainly worry about. The last speaker spoke about the coastal storm issues. That was like a Sandy type storm where we saw that there was overland flooding because of the high winds and surges on the coastline and pushed the water up and over. And then that water looked like inland flooding because it had no way to get back out. It was very difficult for that water to drain once it was up and over the land. And then we also, the top part of this slide is focused on like an Ida type event where we see extreme precipitation. We actually have borrowed a term from the Danish. They refer to these as cloud bursts. So we've been using that term as well these days. Slide 4. These are maps that we have produced. They're publicly available. The slide on the left is showing you approximately 2 inches of rain in 1 hour at a high tide and 2.5 feet of sea level rise. This is the estimate for the 2050s. But again, we're starting to see some of these events today. Of course, not the sea level rise to that extreme, but you could have this high level of precipitation coincide with the storm surge, which would give you very similar results. And again, the slide on the right is looking at the 100-year storm and a rainfall of approximately 3.5 inches in 1 hour. So the blue areas on these maps are showing you the type of inundation, the darker blue being sort of more 1 foot of water that is consistent and contiguous, and the lighter blue shading is sort of a lesser, more nuisance related flooding event. And slide 5 is our opportunity, right? We see that there is a real opportunity to start to reuse water, to really think about water as a full cycle. It's now known in the water utility world as sort of like a one water approach, right? We have the opportunity to capture stormwater and reuse that to reduce the flow to sewers. We look at the on-site treatment potential on some of the larger sites that are being redeveloped, and we're going to give you an example of that, to reduce the amount of flow that's being sent to the sewers and that have the potential to result in combined sewer overflows when we have rain events that will not allow all the wastewater to get to the treatment plant, right? There are some of those events where it's just too much water to be treated by the wastewater facilities. They all came online after the sewer system was built, and they were only sized to 2 times the dry weather flows. And we have the drinking water that helps to offset the potable demand and our resiliency projects. Slide 6, please. Just, you need to cut me off when I'm over my time. I just want to be conscious of that. So we have grant programs. I won't cover most of this, but For those of you that know developers or may be able to promote these types of projects with developers, we have a reuse grant pilot project, and we would like to bring more developers into the fold. Slide 7. We have an example of one of those developers who has taken us up on this. They are utilizing a district scale non-potable water reuse system that will eventually could save up to 200,000 gallons per day and would reduce the flow into the combined sewer system by 99% and is very cost effective from an energy perspective as well. Slide 8. We also have a Central Park North recirculation project. We're partnering with the Central Park Conservancy and the Parks Department to construct a pumping and filtration system to circulate water within the northern water bodies of the Pool, the Lock, and the Harlem Mere. And this will reduce its reliance on the potable supply coming from the city. So we have a tremendous opportunity here. This project is slated for design to be completed rather shortly, and construction anticipated to be completed by 2025. And slide 8 or slide 9, please. Okay, this is where I get super excited because we have a world-class and probably the largest in the country green infrastructure program. We have installed about 11,000 assets over the last several years. And we have sort of, the way I look at it is like a 3-pronged approach. We want to hit the right of way, which represents a vast majority of our imperviousness. And we also have a program that's focused very heavily on public property retrofits, schoolyards, NYCHA, and Parks Department. And we have grant programs and a private incentive program to retrofit private property. Slide 10 is an example of another schoolyard retrofit. This was the PS15 Roberto Clemente on the Lower East Side. This is capturing about 400,000 gallons of stormwater each year. And what you see is a transformed place for the students to play and to gather, but underneath this is all the work. That's where we have dug out and installed a facility that can detain the stormwater before it enters the sewer system. And so we get to partner with the Trust for Public Land on these amenities, and it's really a win-win, I think, for the community and for the departments. And slide 11 is, we have this new program, which we're calling these cloudburst designs. So we're looking and targeting these large medians where we can direct stormwater from the impervious surrounding surfaces to these areas where the water can be detained and infiltrate into the ground rather than running right off into the sewer system. So be on the lookout for many more of those. Slide 12. This is what we discussed. This is our new unified stormwater rule. We are requiring that the private developers infiltrate to the maximum extent possible, reuse the water, and where they don't have soils that are conducive to infiltration, or they are not willing to reuse the water, we will require a very large amount of detention. So they will have a small orifice that will let the water come back to the sewer system, but they will have to detain that water so that hopefully the peak of the storm is past. And we are in the ready to enter the public review of that rule by the end of this year, and we should have that rule in place by mid-2022. And that's really going to help as the city rebuilds, as the city property turns over. Compliance with this rule will actually improve our current conditions. So growth in this way is a good thing for us. And slide 13 is the end, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
That was terrific. Thank you so much. I know we've been joined by the borough president, so Gail, do you want to take over?
Thank you very much. That was a phenomenal discussion. I have some questions, but others may have some questions. I can't see, Jessica, the participants. Something wrong with this computer. So if anybody has questions, please let me know.
I know one thing is that everyone is asking if they can have these slides as well. So hopefully you'll be okay with us circulating.
Absolutely, of course they can.
Okay, there are a couple of questions. First of all, NYCHA is being, I would say, between the PACT and the RAD, there's a lot of back and forth and building. And when I was at a family day recently, to make a long story short, there was a very nice young developer who was doing as good a job as he could. And there were individuals there from NYCHA. And you know me, I have a big mouth. So I say to them, so what are you doing about sustainability and waste and so on? And at which point they said they're doing their own research, at which point I had a heart attack. Because between your office, sustainability, and the amazing woman who runs the waste program at NYCHA, they had never heard of either or any of these entities. So I'm just suggesting that you all work, because the idea of wonderful, decent people who know nothing about the environment doing their own research scared the hell out of me. So I'm just suggesting that you figure out, working with NYCHA is never easy, but something to do with them should be part of what you're doing. Is that something that you're thinking about?
Yes, in fact, we do have a program. Those individuals might not have been aware of it, but we have had some of these green infrastructure installations already on the NYCHA campuses. Gowanus Houses is one that is slated, and we have just completed Clinton Houses and received a very wonderful letter from the NYCHA chair remarking on how this chronically flooded location actually didn't even flood during Ida. So they were extremely grateful. And we have about 21 projects or so in the hopper with them.
Okay.
But we're open to suggestions, because you are right. They have a tremendous opportunity to become.
I know, but they don't know how to realize opportunities. I'll leave it at that. Somebody from you and the mayor's office needs to be in touch with the people who are doing what I would call the asset management, the ones who are looking at the new developments. Because these developers are young and they just go off on their own and they don't know what the hell they're doing. So just a suggestion. It's happened to me twice so far. It's the second quick question I have is, because of this flooding recently and the CSOs, I know it's expensive, but is there some, what are we going to do, if anything? Maybe nothing can be done. What about the CSOs? This may not be your bailiwick, it's more DEP, but go ahead.
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question. So this is really a very difficult problem for us. We have already put over $4 billion, either we've spent or encumbered in the capital plan. And we have another 6 billion or so planned for additional CSO control through tunnels and through retention to detention type practices. The problem that we're seeing is that we are still going to end up having CSOs. We will not abate them. It's becoming a really law of diminishing returns. For each dollar we're spending, we're getting far less for our money. But it's about now a $10 billion CSO program, and it's a fine line between abating those CSOs and investing in this flood mitigation. So we're hoping to strike the proper balance between spending on both of those things.
And then Rikers, we don't know what's going to happen. The next speaker is going to talk to us about the current situation in terms of persons. But if in fact people move out, who knows what's going to happen. I know that you have some proposals there. Is that something that you're working on, or is it a different group in terms of that space for renewable Rikers Island? I have the whole plan here, but I just didn't know what you were thinking.
Yep. Well, I work closely. It is another deputy commissioner here. She runs the wastewater treatment system. But we have our teams working together cooperatively on the Rikers Island feasibility study. And it is our hope that we can transform that island for a wastewater recovery facility and enable us to kind of leave some of the space on the land for 4 of our wastewater treatment plants. They probably would still need satellite facilities, but we would be able to shrink our footprint on the mainland.
Okay, Jessica, other questions, because I could go on forever on this topic, so.
Sorry, I was muted. Does anyone else have any questions for the Deputy Commissioner?
We really, yeah,
That was
excellent.
terrific. That was a terrific presentation. That's great information, and we're going to be happy to circulate that slide deck. That was great.
Thank you so much for having me.
The only other quick, I'm sorry, one other quick question. I do think that in general, we have to find a way to explain to the public kind of what you're doing is complicated, but I think they want to know. And so as time goes on, how we can, explain what the CSO does or doesn't do, or I was a big fan of Al Appleton, and he took literally tons of people touring Croton and Delaware and whatever. I guess we did the Catskills too. That kind of thing has to happen on a regular basis. That's how you get at least some of the stakeholders involved in supporting your work. Something to think about.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very, very much. All right, Jessica, the next.
Yes. Next, we are moving to Melissa Eichen from the Renewable Rikers Coalition and also Lawyers for Public Interest. And also Darren Mack is here from Renewable Rikers as well. So if you can talk to us about some of the work you're doing and the important piece of environmental justice in all of this work.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you so much to the borough president. I'm also a member of the Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board and have been for many years. And so I enjoy talking trash with the borough president regularly as well. As mentioned, my name is Melissa Yashan. I am Senior Supervising Counsel at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest Environmental Justice Program. And I'm here today with Darren Mack, who is the co-founder at Freedom Agenda at the Urban Justice Center, which is a membership-based organization comprised largely of individuals and family members of those who have survived Rikers. Darren and I have known each other and worked together now for over 5 years, first coming together in the movement to close Rikers, and coming from the environmental justice space to join with a largely criminal legal justice reform movement. I was able to bring sort of compelling human rights arguments from a different perspective. We did a survey, we at NOPI did a survey between the years of 2016 and 2018 about the conditions on Rikers. And these are the housing conditions, but due to the environmental circumstances of the island, which is 80% built on a decomposing landfill. And we found that the environmental conditions of Rikers have created serious and severe human rights violations for the people who are housed there, detained there, as well as for people who have to work there, but primarily for people who are detained there. The most significant and disconcerting aspect we found that hadn't yet been covered, many of the other atrocities had been covered, was the lack of running water and clean running water and sanitary conditions. And this is, mind you, 5 years before the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And this is not simply due to overcrowding. This is not simply due to the torture and that the human beings are subjected to. This is really due to the fact that these are really old buildings built on a decomposing landfill that is shifting all the time, and no plumbing and foundation can really tolerate that. So luckily, only a year and a half into our advocacy, the city committed to closing Rikers and closing the jails on Rikers. And similar to what the deputy commissioner was saying about throwing money into a problem that's just going to keep getting more expensive, to stop throwing money into trying to fix these jails or build more jails on this island, and instead really think about how we can humanely treat people who are required to be detained. And conditions of confinement matter, but also this island and its legacy and its current environmental conditions are inappropriate to continue to be the site of any incarceration or detention. So the city committed to close Rikers by 2027. And that initiated a conversation amongst our coalition about, okay, so what are we going to ask for the investment to be into? If we are kind of shifting away from throwing more and more money into this money pit of Rikers Island jails, where can we shift investment into? And obviously, decarceration efforts are front and foremost, but investing in the communities who have been the most over policed, over incarcerated is key. And through these conversations, we identified that these were also the communities that have traditionally been the most overpolluted. These are the same communities that have the highest amount of population on Rikers, where we see our peaker plants are cited, where we see our truck-intensive land-based transfer stations are cited. And yes, where many of our wastewater treatment plants are cited as well. And that led to the birth of the Renewable Rikers Coalition. And the Renewable Rikers Coalition is really a powerful group of individuals and organizations who have come together with reparative justice that transcends criminal legal justice and environmental justice to really just talk about justice and repairing the harms on people, their families, and communities who have borne the legacies of racism in this city. And we advocated on behalf of the Renewables Rikers Act, which was 3 bills that the City Council passed this past February, was signed into law by the mayor. And yet, as the borough president just said, there are still lots of questions about, is Rikers actually going to close? Is it going to close by the date that the law requires it to be closed right now? Because they're not only does Renewable Rikers require it that there be no incarceration on that island by August 2027, but there was a ULURP that was passed the year before the Renewable Rikers Act that was passed that turned Rikers Island into a public place as of August of 2027, which means no incarceration can occur there after August of 2027. So there are currently 2 legal deadlines that ensure that Rikers will be closed as jail facilities by that date. But it makes so much sense considering the crisis of humanity that we are seeing on Rikers right now and the urgent crisis of our climate to start that closure sooner. And in fact, local law 16 requires that every 6 months, the mayor transfer unused land and property on Rikers Island from the Department of Corrections to the Department of Citywide Administrative Services to begin transforming that space for resiliency and renewable infrastructure purposes. That being said, they only transferred the minimal amount with the first deadline, 1 facility, and that facility is still being used by DOC for storage. And now with the current crisis, and I'm going to hand it over to Darren to say a little bit more about this, but with the current crisis, what we're seeing is the threat of more incarceration, it continuing to increase the number of people on the island. And so the footprint that DOC is using is starting to expand again. And that goes against the entire spirit of Renewable Rikers. It goes against the entire spirit of restorative justice and reparative justice. And we have serious concerns. And hopefully there are concerns that everyone on this call can help us address, but I'll hand it over to Darren to speak a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll say that, as a survivor of Rikers myself, survivor of Rikers are 100% united that a Renewable Rikers is system transformation. As Melissa mentioned, on July 9th, GATC, which is one of the facilities, a closed facility on Rikers Island, has been transferred from the Department of Corrections to the Department of Citywide Administrative Services. And this is historic because for the first time in history of Rikers, portion of the island is not owned and managed by DOC. And we are pushing this current administration before it ends to transfer even more of the island that our coalition have clearly identified in accordance with the law. And with the exacerbated crisis that's happening on Rikers, we need this current administration to do that and a few number of things, like establish and convene the 2 commissions that's required by law. The commission, the feasibility commission for the wastewater treatment, and the feasibility commission for sustainable renewable energy. So those are basically 3 things. Those 2 commissions and to transfer even more unused land to send a signal to the next administration that we are moving forward with the closure of Rikers Island finally. And if there's any questions, I shared the link to the Renewable Bikers website in the chat. And if there's any questions, we could take a couple.
Go ahead. I mean, Jessica, are there questions? I can't see that for some reason.
I don't see any raised hands right now, so.
Okay, I have a question because obviously Darren, and I think Melissa knows, we had a Rikers Island Task Force. We had many meetings in Chinatown. We were supportive of the ULURP, the whole challenge. That's when I sort of made that comment, because I must admit, I don't know where we're at. So, and I think lawsuits have been averted in terms of, settled. I think for all 4 boroughs, you know better than I, definitely Manhattan. So where are we, I guess?
Yeah, the plan is still on the table, as Melissa mentioned, August 2027. There's more that the current mayor could do to move things forward. And there are actually this year, there's supposed to be sites that's actually started demolition in Queens for the site for the Queens facility.
Right.
And I think there's like upcoming also demolition at the other sites this year. But the mayor could be doing much more in regards to decarceration, in regards to transferring land over from Department of Corrections to DCAS, establishing this commission and moving forward with that. To send a signal to the next administration that things are moving forward. We have a plan on the table. It's a crisis right now, and we can't be stalled. We have to keep moving forward with the plan.
Okay.
If I can say one more thing about the Rikers Advisory Committee, which is a key part of Local Law 16, which Darren referred to. The Rikers Advisory Committee was one of the key pieces for the advocates in this legislation, because it is the one mechanism to ensure that directly impacted voices continue to be consulted with and advising on this plan as it is designed and implemented. And the Rikers Island Advisory Committee was supposed to be appointed and convened by no later than August 24th. We are here at September 21st. The committee hasn't been appointed, much less convened. And we sent a letter to the mayor, we sent a letter to DCAS, we sent a letter to the speaker, and we are highly concerned about sort of the lackadaisical approach of this administration, given the urgency of the climate crisis and the humanitarian crisis that is occurring on Rikers.
So maybe what Darren and Melissa we could do is the 5 borough presidents could back you up with a similar letter to the mayor asking that this be moved on. Now, of course, different boroughs have different challenges. Staten Island is another story. They don't have it. And the Bronx borough president doesn't like the site, as you know. Yeah. So, but I could try, I know, and Chinatown is very upset, as you also know. So it's that's the trouble, is it was done in a way that got people upset along the way. But that one I try, at least some of us could write that letter and try to back you up. And try to get that task force going.
And we're happy to support and consult however you need us to. That would be wonderful.
Okay. I mean, this is one of these, there are so many intractable issues, but it needs to happen, and Darren is right. So we just need to push at every level. Yes. I appreciate all that you have done. And I remember many of you participating in all of these meetings in Manhattan, and it's much appreciated, much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you for your support.
Yeah. Easier said than done. Jessica, any questions about this? I can say that there are lots of ideas for when it is in DCAS's hands, and all of your suggestions for what it could be. There's no shortage of that. It's just getting to that point.
Yeah, I wondered about that, if you wanted to maybe just talk a little bit about some of the ideas that have some of the large scale ideas that are out there for after the property gets transferred. Yeah,
so we, as Darren sort of referred to, we've actually been working with both the mayor's Office of Sustainability and Climate, as well as DEP, on the 2 feasibility studies. One is part of the city's bigger long-term energy plan, which is looking at renewable energy generation and storage options on the island, and in particular solar and battery storage. And then her name is Kathleen Esposito. She's the other woman at DEP who's been working with us, who is brilliant and wonderful, just as the deputy commissioner who spoke today was. There is a lot of enthusiasm for the possibility and what it can mean to have a state-of-the-art new wastewater recovery center on Rikers with an anaerobic digester attached to it, what that means in terms of organic waste processing capacity too, and having a big compost facility as well as anaerobic digestion on the island, and how all of that works together. We're talking about the Governor's Island presentation. It's what, 120 some acres? We're talking about 413 acres. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity for a city as jam-packed as New York, where we don't have the opportunity to really generate our own renewable infrastructure at the scale that we need to really truly transition away from fossil fuel. This is the opportunity, and we can create good green jobs in doing it and really provide reparative justice to the communities that have been most harmed by the legacy of incarceration and pollution. So it's a really exciting vision and project, and the actual hard work of seeing it get done and seeing it slowly move forward is where we are now.
Okay, it's good to talk to you because I always feel like we're stuck, but we're not going to be stuck because you're going to make sure, and we'll work with you. Val, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is just my question is basically, it sounds like what we heard before was that it would be in 4 different boroughs and the place, and that would be like a total system. So I don't quite understand. I know there was a lot of protests here in Manhattan, so I don't understand exactly what is the plan now. Is it the same plan? Is it the same places? What's the plan now? Because I think we clearly see that things are getting worse and worse out on Rikers Island.
Yes, that's a good question. Yeah. So the plan is basically what advocates and survivors of Rikers fought for, which is still on the table, and that's to close all 10 jails on Rikers Island, including the boat, which is known as the barge, is adjacent to the Bronx, and to replace the current facilities that exist right now in the boroughs. So you have the Brooklyn House of Detention, the Manhattan House of Detention, the Queens House of Detention, which is next to the courts, like every jail system across the country is next to the courts. Replace those facilities, and because the Bronx doesn't have a site next to the court, there's city property that's going to be a facility will be built on the city property. So to get rid of the barge, which is probably the only jail boat in the country. And so that's the plan. So going from 14,000 beds across the city down to 3,300.
Okay, so it's the same plan. All right, thank you.
The same plan, but fewer beds, even fewer beds than when the Euler process was begun. The amount of maximum beds has shrunk as decarceration efforts have been passed by the state and city.
I basically meant the same plan in terms of location. Because I knew that I live in Manhattan, I live near Chinatown, so I, kind of know some of that detail. I think the other thing is that even somebody talked about this last time, and I've heard Eric Adams talk about the fact that you want a holistic approach to this whole concept of incarceration. And there is a study, it was a while back, that if children are not proficient readers by the 3rd grade, they tend not to get a high school diploma. And if they are Black or Puerto Rican males, they tend to go to jail. So I was wondering what, in terms of some of this money, in terms of a holistic approach, what are the thoughts about a holistic approach when you have that study? It was a big study, the 3rd grade, if they're not proficient readers. So what is,
Yeah, so along with the vote in October 2019, City Council also passed legislation to establish a community commission of community reinvestments, reinvestments that impacted by Rikers Island. So this commission been convening and they have 4 subcommittees. One of them is youth, one of them is employment, one of them is health, and the other is housing, to address the issues that communities like the South Bronx, like Bronzeville, Brooklyn, like South Jamaica, Queens, like the Lower East Side, like Harlem, have been historically under-resourced to reinvest the money, to reinvest money not only that's saved from closing Rikers Island, and the Lippman Commission estimated about $1.8 billion every year could be saved from closing Rikers Island. To invest that money into those communities to address those issues like you mentioned around education, around health, around mental health, around employment, etc. So there's a commission that's convening, going to be submitting recommendations to the mayor, which he has to respond to by law within 60 days, and hopefully he take these recommendations seriously, because it's people who've been impacted by Rikers Island on this commission, like myself. There's systems stakeholders on this commission, and there's people who provide programs and services to those very same communities that on this commission that's going to be working on these recommendations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Darren. I'm a little bit more cynical than you, but I hear you, because if you could just take people out of 52 chambers and put them in the damn schools, that would be helpful. But that's just Gail Brewer talking. So anyway, I want to say thank you, unless there's anybody else, Jessica, because I always try to stick to the 4 o'clock, and because I know people are busy. Is there any, you two, thank you both very much. Thank you, Darren Mack. Thank you, Melissa Eichen, and thank you for all that you're doing. And we're hopefully able to support you, like we said about that one letter trying to get the 5 borough presidents. We will work on that. At least we might get some of them to be supportive.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. And thank you for participating. Take care. Bye.